this. There we go. Okay. So, welcome to this session about implementing role-based access control inside of Microsoft Defender. Some required slides really don't have that much information about the prizes you can win or the competitions you need to enter to win them, but I'm guessing that you've already gotten that information from the event crew from one way or another. So implementing role-based access control in Defender XDR. As you can see, the session time and the session number is blanked because I could not find out which number I had or what the time is in India at the moment. So I apologize, but here we are. That's me on the screen. My name is Viktor Hedberg. I work as a senior technical architect at a Swedish cybersecurity company called TrueSec. You can see the logo up here in the corner. What we do is basically anything that revolves around security, regardless of on-prem, cloud, information security, penetration testing, and of course, but last but not least, our extensive experience inside of the fields of incident response. So I'm a member of the said incident response team. We perform, well, last year we performed about 33,000 hours worth of incident response engagements, and they all vary in various different scenarios, right? We're not talking 33,000 hours worth of ransomware cases, but anything from business email compromise to single PC forensics to, yeah, you name it. We do it. We do most of it, and we do it quite well. So on the topic of incident response and Defender, we're going to talk about role-based access control. So this shouldn't be news to anyone, albeit it still is to some extent. So what is role-based access control? Well, it is a way to, it's intended to solve the Frodo issue. Yeah, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, I like to draw parallels to it. So instead of having one ring, and if you're in possession of that ring, you can do everything. We want to break it up into smaller pieces. So your account can only do this, your account can only do that, etc., etc. This is all based on the fact that during most of our, or to say 99% of our incident response engagements, customers fail to adhere to these practices regarding role-based access control. And we're not just talking the cloud, we're also talking on-prem. So things like administrative tiering, you know, separating administrative zones or administrative interfaces from one another. This becomes really, really important in today's age. And Defender is no exception. And it also ties into purview. We're not going to discuss purview at great length in this, but let's just say that if you're a global admin or a compliance admin, you have all the powers you need to decrypt and declassify any information protected by Microsoft Information Protection. So this is the same thing, but inside of the Defender sphere. So we're going to try to solve the Frodo issue. And it also gives us the possibility to give really granular access nowadays. Now, if we turn back time a couple of years, we didn't have this level of granularity inside of the Defender role-based access control structure, but we do now. And we're going to show you, I'm going to show you how you can do it and some real nice tidbits on how to think and what to watch out for. So why is it important? Don't worry, this is like the last slide before we're going into live demos. This session is not intended for, you know, people who want to have a really nice PowerPoint presentation delivered to them. So the granular access gives us a greater control in terms of who can do what, who can see what, and who can act on which alert, basically. And it also, because of how any security product is used, we're not just talking Defender here. We can also talk about, well, CrowdStrike or Sentinel-1 or whichever platform you might use. This concept is applicable, and really you need to use this in any platform regardless. Because since it is a security platform, you automatically have a lot of permissions on the monitored systems, right? So by using an RBAC structure, we can limit the possibility of moving laterally within the cloud environment. So jumping from one resource to another, or one mailbox to another, things like that. But we're also limiting the possibility of moving laterally from the cloud into the on-prem environment. Some people don't know this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later on. But if you have these one ring to rule them all permissions on your account, you're basically God and everything else on the systems that you're monitoring via, for instance, Defender for Endpoint. So say that you have your domain controllers onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, which you should. That also means that your global admins and your security admins right off the bat are indirectly domain admins on your on-prem environment. And why is that? Well, you have this feature called live response, which is great. I really love all these features inside of Defender, don't get me wrong. But live response gives the security analyst the possibility to execute remote code on any monitored system. Now that can be used maliciously, right? So if my global admin account gets compromised, someone signs into the Defender portal, initiates a live response session to my domain controller, presto, the threat actor is now a domain admin as well. So we really need to think about all these possibilities as well. I'm not saying that you should not use Defender. That's really far from the truth. You really must use these solutions in today's security hemisphere, but you need to think it through. That's basically what I'm saying. And with that, let's look into, okay, what's Viktor actually talking about? So here we have my little demo environment. Fun fact, I accidentally blocked myself out of this demo environment in the beginning of the summer. I played around with creating a passkey. Unfortunately, my phone did not pick up that it should have a passkey on it, so I was effectively blocked from logging into my own tenant. Thanks, Microsoft support, for helping me get back. So, first things first, inside of the Defender portal or the XDR portal, we have this little section called permissions. Now, with the unified RBAC model, we can create our custom roles inside of the Defender architecture. So if we just look through what that could look like in terms of the basics, so we'll say we want to create a level 1 security analyst role. Now the level 1 security analyst is supposed to work with security operations. And as you can see here, we're already getting this level of granularity that we missed previously. So say that, hey, we can manage alerts, we can manage response, live response, nope. File collection, sure. Email collaboration, yeah. Okay. So this is a really constricted way of delegating access into the Defender portal. We can also use this to say that under the assignments, and we can also see, okay, which workloads are this role intended to work with. Okay, so previously in the old RBAC model, we only had, if you create this role, they have full access to all alerts inside of the Defender portal. This time around, we can actually say, hey, you can only work with alerts coming from Defender for Endpoint and Defender Vulnerability Management. So this, in terms of granularity, gives us the opportunity to say, you can only work with alerts and manage alerts for a specific workload. And presto, you can imagine that, hey, we can create multiple roles with the same level of access tied to different workloads, right? So we have our Defender for Endpoint workload, we have our Defender for Office 365 workload, Defender for Identity, and now we can really get creative with, how many people in said teams should have access to different workloads. As always, we need to provide some names, which is cumbersome sometimes. Level 1 security analyst. Now, in this case, you can see we can say assign users and groups. Now, this is where one of the really important features or facts that I want to share with you guys today comes into play. So, of course, we can use direct assignments on users. That gets quite out of control quite quickly because, well, it's hard to keep track on, is this user still in the organization? Is it still doing the same things, et cetera, et cetera? So what I want you to think about is try using the security groups instead. But when I'm saying security groups, I would like to introduce a thought to say maybe not all security groups, and I'm going to get to what I'm on about just in a second. The life of a incident responder consists mainly of energy drinks and Diet Coke in my case, and frozen pizzas. So what type of security group should we use to construct our role-based access control? Well, since we're dealing with high levels of permissions inside of the XDR suite, this little feature right here, you can see Microsoft Entra roles can be assigned to this group. If we toggle that switch to yes from no, well, this means that if I create a group here called Level 1 Security Analysts, we set the Microsoft Entra roles can be assigned to this group. We don't need to give it a role. We don't need to enter any members for the sake of this demo. We're just going to create this group. Now it gives us a warning that says that, hey, you can't change this later. But what's actually happening in the background is that we have created what's called a privileged access group or a role assignable group, depending on who you ask. I like the privileged access group. What that little switch does is that it limits who can add members to this group inside of Entra ID. So what we've done is that we've created a group, and the only roles that can actually alter the membership of that group are as follows. So global administrators, privileged role administrators, and the group owner. To say that if we create another group called Level 1 Security Analysts, we don't toggle that switch and we just create it. The difference between these two groups is that you need to be highly privileged to alter the memberships inside of this group. So as I said, global admin, privileged role admin, or the group owner. Now, for this other group that we created, which has a similar name, it's sufficient to be a group admin or a help desk admin. Anyone who can alter group memberships can add a new member into this one. So on the topic of role-based access control and trying to really get granular control over who can do what inside of our Defender instance, I would argue that you should use the privileged access groups for as long as possible. Because, as I said, if you think like 4 or 5 steps ahead, so we don't use a privileged access group. A group admin account gets compromised. That group admin account can now be used to add members into a role-based access group inside of Defender, which means that in the worst case scenario, you have another indirect global admin or indirect domain admin in your environment. Let's see, this might not show up. Let's do like this. Okay, it's not showing up here. We need to cancel out of it and do everything once more. Security operations. So we'll add that protected group. We'll make sure to do as we did before. We can say that, okay, if you're a member of the level 1 security analysts privileged access group, you get permissions on Defender and the Defender vulnerability management services inside of Defender XDR. And the same goes for, let's say, we wanted to create one for Defender for Identity. Well, you just create another role for Defender for Identity. You do have these old groups inside of Entra ID, like these ones, Azure ATP groups. They still grant you some level of access to Defender for Identity, but don't use them anymore. Work with the unified RBAC instead. This is old stuff that probably will be retired at some point in time. Okay, so what we've done now is that we've created a role group inside of Defender. We've configured it to use a more secure group than a regular security group. But that's not all we need to take into consideration when we're dealing with high permissions or high level of permissions and access to Defender XDR. So what else can be done? Well, I'm a little bit paranoid and I like to rely on security features to protect my environment. So I'm going to show you guys another thing that we can use to further enhance the security around our XDR platform. So we do have these role groups. Let's imagine that we've created a couple more. Now we can actually say that we can create a conditional access policy to say you need to use a privileged access workstation. We can say that, hey, if you're a member of this group, level 1 security analysts, this policy will apply to you. It applies to all cloud apps. And this is where we can get really nifty with how we configure conditional access policies. So say that we have this set up in our environment. We have our RBAC model in place. And now we want to take it to the next step to say that, okay, from where can a security analyst actually operate? We don't want them to be able to operate from, their laptop at home or their gaming rig at home or the hotel computer or anything like that. We want to be really, really granular on how and when access can happen. And this is where conditional access can come into great effect. So we can say that we filter devices, we exclude the device ID property that looks like, well, so inside of Entra ID, you grab the device ID of said devices and you add it to this rule syntax. And what will happen is that we block access via conditional access policies, except for authentication requests coming from that particular device ID. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that not only do we have the correct levels of permissions inside of the unified RBAC model, saying, okay, which user can do what inside of Defender XDR, but now we're also saying from where can they perform these actions. Because if one of these security analysts' accounts are compromised, they are pretty much unusable anywhere else, because you need to be on that particular system that you've specified inside of the conditional access policy. And to make this more visually appealing, let's say that, hey, this device right here, this laptop, is the one that I configured inside of the conditional access policy. The device ID is protected inside of the TPM chip on your laptops if they have TPM 2.0 or higher, which all new laptops should have. So it's really hard. It's not impossible, but it's really hard for a threat actor to steal the device ID or manipulate it inside of the authentication request. And that means that not only do you need to have my security analyst's username and password, you also need to have physical access to this particular device, which makes the whole setup quite robust, if you ask me. Now, the things that I'm talking about here, or when we're talking about, administrative tiering or whatever it might be, they're in no way, the silver bullet that will rid your organization from any security gap. Okay? These are speed bumps, as we'd like to call them, meaning that it makes it harder for a threat actor to achieve their end goal. And their end goal usually revolves around, well, ransomware in your company. So what you want to have in order to make it harder for a threat actor is to have these kinds of things in place. To say that, hey, we do use privileged access workstations. We have a robust role-based access control configuration set up inside of the cloud. Because that means that any threat actor needs to be louder in order to succeed with their operations. They need to force their way into your systems. And that's where, Defender is going to light up like a Christmas tree, so you can kick them out. That's all this is. So, as I said, if we look inside of Defender for Endpoint, you can see we have the same kind of thought here. Since this you see here, users with admin permissions are automatically assigned to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint administrative roles with full permissions. That means that global admins and security administrators are Defender for Endpoint administrators. Okay? So global administrators do have the possibility of, doing whatever they want inside of Defender for Endpoint. And the same goes for security administrators. So you need to protect those roles as well. So not only do we need to work with this level of RBAC inside of the Defender console, we also need to think about the roles that I already mentioned. Now, those roles also increase in scope because if we're using conditional access policy to enforce or tighten our security in regards of, access and how access can be attained, you probably need to protect your conditional access administrator role as well. So as you can see, and as I've talked about a lot here, when we're dealing with Defender XDR and we have an on-prem environment, the highest level of permissions is basically the same, regardless if you're on-prem or in the cloud. So if you're a domain admin, you can escalate your way into the cloud to become a global admin, and vice versa. Now, thankfully, Microsoft is changing the levels of permissions on the directory synchronization accounts, but for the time being, it's really hard to protect the cloud if on-prem is compromised, and it's really hard to protect on-prem if the cloud is compromised. So we really need to start thinking about, hybrid IT infrastructure. That if I'm God in one area, I'm also God in the other area. Okay. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Well, yeah. So we talked about the conditional access policies to ensure that users, the security analysts, can only sign in from a specific device. If that's not an option, one can always use like I'm using. So you see here, I'm on a virtual machine which is hosted on my laptop. We can use Entra ID join the virtual machine to say this is my security operations box. I need to be logged into that device in order to access Defender XDR. If that's not an option either, well, you probably need to look for conditional access policies talking about authentication strength. So using things like these are YubiKeys, hardware tokens, in order to protect your account from being used elsewhere in the environment or on the internet in general. So to summarize a little bit, it's not that I'm running out of time, it's that I'm running out of things to talk about, and I'll open up to questions quite soon. Work with the privileged access groups inside of Entra ID, because that's a really nifty way to protect who can add accesses inside of Defender. Have a robust conditional access policy framework to say, okay, where can a security analyst actually access the Defender console from? Work with privileged access workstations, or if that's not an option, certificate-based or hardware tokens. Because this level of permission, we always want to have an extra factor that's harder for a threat actor to get their hands on. Passkeys might work, but in terms of using a virtual machine, you won't be able to use passkeys because the passkey needs to connect via Bluetooth to your virtual machine. And if you expose Bluetooth from your virtual machine to your regular laptop, that's not a position you want to be in. So conditional access, the groups, and not to forget the data sources inside of the security portal. So instead of having, hey, you're a security analyst, you can do whatever you want inside of Defender XDR, try to limit the levels of permissions based on the roles that the users have. So if they're a tier 3 analyst, they do everything in terms of security operations. They need to have everything in levels of permissions. But that also means that we need to protect them in the same manner. Because not only do we have the risk of lateral movement in terms of Defender for endpoint, it can also be, Defender for Identity can also be used to, not move laterally from the cloud into on-prem, but in Defender for Identity, we do have something called action accounts. I did not have Defender for Identity configured in my own environment. Shame on me. Basically, an action account inside of Defender for Identity gives you the possibility to say, if this alert pops up in the Defender console, you can use the action account in Defender for Identity to reset the password of that user on-prem. Now, default, the action account is the system account of the monitored system. So basically the domain controller itself. That also means that it opens up possibilities for an actor to reset passwords on-prem using Defender for Identity. It's basically what I'm saying. I like right-click that user in the Defender portal and say, reset this password. Okay. And it will happen. So it's really important that you keep in mind the levels of permissions that you're delegating inside of the Defender XDR. I can hear myself echoing from somewhere. The levels of permissions, the conditional access policies to have greater control on, where in the world can you be to access Defender XDR. And as I said, the groups. Make sure to use privileged access groups to lock down who can actually delegate these permissions inside of the Defender suite. And that's really all that I had. I'm just going to pop back into this little PowerPoint presentation. I want to thank you all so much for coming to listen to me. If you do have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat or just come off mute and ask them. And yeah, thanks to the event crew behind the Purview and Defender Days. It's been a real pleasure to be here talking to you guys about this.
All right, Viktor, I see some questions in the chat if you want to take them.
Yeah, so I see. Yes, Anders, another great Swedish guy. Thanks. Tack. Passkeys on Entra ID quite complicated. The fact that you only can use the Microsoft app makes it even more complicated. Yeah, so passkeys are still in public preview. They're not intended for use in large scale, and I do agree there are some scenarios that might be needing to be looked into prior to pushing this to general availability. Conditional access policy be extended to corporate mobile devices. I'm guessing that it's the conditional access policy to say, hey, you need to be on this particular device in order to gain access to the cloud. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have a mobile device registered registered to Entra ID, it automatically gets a device ID. You don't want to perform, security operations tasks on a mobile device because it's not intended for that. But sure, you can use the conditional access policy that I just showed you on mobile devices as well. Do you know if there will be an access review feature for RBAC roles similar to the one in Azure for admin roles? Not, to my knowledge, not from the Defender point of view. However, since we're leveraging Entra ID groups, we can use, entitlement management inside of Entra ID to perform access reviews on those particular groups, right? So we have the roles that I mentioned previously, global admins, security admins, access reviews on those bad boys. And the same goes for your RBAC groups that you created inside of Entra ID. So, you can work around it that way, but it's not known to me if there will be like the type of entitlement management is focused directly on the unified RBAC model. And that's it in terms of questions. If you happen to have another question that you don't want to share in the chat, yeah, exactly. The lateral movement point highlighted. Absolutely. You need to think about it. I don't know how many customers that I've had that, okay, our security team are focusing on on-prem, but we're going to use Defender for endpoint, and that's the modern work group kind of thing. They're in charge of that. And when I told them that, hey, that those guys are domain admins as well, it was like, yeah, they look like they saw a ghost, basically. So it's really important that you think about that. But what I was going to say, if you have any questions or feedback or whatever, feel free to reach me on Twitter. I can drop my handle here in the chat. So I'm not fond of name changes, so I still call it Twitter. Let's see. I don't want to. So that's my Twitter handle. And if you want to be connected on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me on this URL. Let's see. Stupid Edge doing stupid Edge things. There we go. There's the link. Ah, crap. I misspelled my Twitter handle. Like that.